It's a simple question with no simple answers. Why now? Why this? Why me? Is God even here? Is he listening? How can we know? We've made it through dark times before, and I want to have faith, but I still wonder, why?
Good morning, everybody. As Steve said, my name's Martin. I'm a volunteer around here, and it is absolutely brilliant to be able to come and share with us this morning as we continue this series, which we've called Ever Wonder Why. Because we have loads of these big questions. Whether this is our first time in church or whether we've been coming here for years, we always have huge questions that we want to ask. And maybe some of the questions we've been talking about this series are not ones that you would personally have, but I'm sure that you know people that do have them. And even if it's not directly speaking into questions you've got right now, maybe it will equip you to talk to other people about them who might want to find out about this thing we call church. I love being part of a church that acknowledges that this belief business isn't always easy. I really love that we are brave enough to tackle these tough questions head on. Because as Steve said earlier on, it's really good to ask questions. It's good to explore why, because it helps us to delve deeper even. Doesn't help us to talk. It helps us to, here we go, delve deeper, there we go, and find out more. And maybe this is your first week or one of your first weeks here at church. Firstly, welcome. My guess is that you're sat there with loads of questions already. Like, why did that guy sing the Backstreet Boys at church? Yeah? Or maybe you've got questions about those songs we've just sung, saying, what did that mean? What did that word mean in there? And I encourage you to ask people. Please don't be afraid of thinking you're going to offend us by asking questions. We're designed as a church so that we can address those questions with you, and we'd love to get involved. So do that. Well, this week we're going to be talking about those times where God seems to be far away, and we're left wondering why that's the case. And for some of us, it might be hard to even comprehend what it's like to feel God anyway, because either we don't think we have experienced it, or even if we do, it's really hard to describe. Now, to try and help us to get our heads around this a little bit and to contextualize it, I'm going to take us back to the summer of 2012. And my wife, Sarah, and I, and a couple of other members of our family are sat in some temporary stands on Horse Guards Parade in London, about to watch some beach volleyball as part of the Olympic Games. Now, because I'm me, we've arrived super early. And we're sat in our seats waiting for it all to happen. And I'm just sat there, seemingly in some kind of a bit of a trance, pretty much silent, seemingly a bit perturbed by something. And a little while later, Sarah turns to me and says, "Are you all right? Like, you're meant to be enjoying this." Well, you see, the truth is, I was absolutely fine. But because sport is such a massive, massive deal to me, being at the Olympic Games completely overwhelmed me. I'm like, this is the sporting thing, and I am here. I had one of these kind of lost in the moment, awe-inspiring, pinch me, is this true times, when there seems to be something otherworldly going on that we can't quite explain. We were then fortunate enough to go to some of the other events at London that summer, in both the Olympics and the Paralympics, and every time it got me, but it did wane a little bit after you got a little bit used to it. You know, maybe you've had those kind of moments in church or around God, or at least you know of others who have said that about their own faith. That they've had these awe-inspiring, pinch me, is this true type moment that's not quite able to be described. And yet many of us might have never felt like we've experienced God in that way. It might be why you're still just paddling at the edge of this faith ocean and not quite ready to dive right in. Because you might really want to experience God, to kind of almost prove to yourself that all this stuff we might sing about, read about, hear about is actually true. But you've not had that feeling yet. What is that feeling anyway? Is it a tingling of excitement? Well, you can have that if you go on a first date with someone, right? Or is it an incredibly emotional feeling, because we can have those in many places. It might even get you when you're watching Toy Story 3 and Andy gives his toys away. If you know, you know. It was like properly emotional. It got me, okay? Or is it a really peaceful, relaxing feeling? You know, you can find those on a relaxing holiday, or curled up with a good book, or a long soak in the bath with a few candles, so I've heard. You know, some of us may have had those experiences of God where he feels so close, but it feels like ages since it's happened. It's like God's now become one of those friends who you used to be so close to, but one of you's moved away, and you're still mates, but it's not quite like it was when you could sit in the same room and have a good chat over a coffee or a wine. And so we're left asking this question that we're going to explore together for the next 15 minutes or so, which is, why does God feel far away? And it's an important and fair question, because if God is who he says he is, we'd want to experience him, right? We'd want to feel his presence with us. We'd want to feel close to him. We'd want to kind of just know exactly what that like that many of the writers of the Bible describe, that just sounds so incredible. And as we go through this question today, I'm going to refer to a number of extracts from a book of the Bible that we call the Psalms. Now, if you don't know what the Psalms are, the Psalms you'd find in the Old Testament of the Bible. And if you were to have a physical copy of the Bible with you, they're pretty much smack bang in the middle. And in terms of their literary form, what they are, it's a collection of 150 ancient Hebrew poems, songs, and prayers that were actually written over a number of years, a number of different eras of Israel's history as a place. Now, 73 of these psalms are connected to a guy we know as King David, of giant-slaying fame. But there's also a number of other authors of them, and in fact, around 50 are anonymous. And many of these psalms would have been used by the temple choirs around kind of 2,000 to 3,000 years ago as part of their worship. Now, we can't quite call them a songbook, but it's almost kind of what we're getting at. And as with many songs over the course of history, these psalms seem to fit into one of two things. Number one, it's people being sad and lamenting the tough times in life. Or on the other hand, it's people being full of joy, full of love, being full of happiness. And so therefore, they are songs of praise. And one of these, of that latter type, these psalms of praise, is Psalm 16, where we read King David saying this. Look at what he says. He says, I know the Lord is always with me. I know God is always with me. I will not be shaken, for he is right beside me. No wonder my heart is glad and I rejoice. Doesn't that sound great? Wouldn't you like to live a life full of that confidence that God is next to you right now? I think I would. We'd want to know God is with us when everything around us is going wrong and we're facing some of those tough life situations like Mike spoke about last week. And if you haven't been here for the rest of this series, you can go back and catch up online, and it's so worth doing that. You know, we'd want God to be so close to us that we could really feel he was guiding us on whether we should take that job or marry that girl or make that investment or allow our children to do that thing. And yet, as we've hinted at, and as we know all too well, God doesn't always appear to be as close as we would want him to be. So I wonder, whose fault is that? Is it God's fault? Is it your fault? Is it Ben Lasky's fault because he didn't choose the right songs that morning? It didn't help you to feel near to God? Well, I want to suggest that there are three factors in play here that lead us to ask this question of why doesn't God always feel near us, and why we don't always feel that he is there close to us all of the time. And these factors can be summarized by these headings. Firstly, over-sensationalizing. Secondly, distancing. And thirdly, misfocusing. And I'm going to take each of these in turn, and hopefully it will lead us to a place where we can find some answers to why God does feel far away. So firstly, I think we can over-sensationalize what it's like to experience God. As I mentioned earlier, it's hard to explain what it's like to feel God close to you. And if you've never experienced it, maybe you're expecting something far grander than what it actually might be. And I get that. If that is what you're expecting, I totally get that. Because if God is who we've come to believe he is, then he should be able to do something totally out of the ordinary, or we might expect something totally out of the ordinary every time he is near to us. And that's especially true, and that can be confirmed when we look at what some of the writers of the Bible say about experiencing God. For example, most of us will have heard of Moses. Well, Moses experienced God in a number of ways according to the book of Exodus, one of them being a burning bush, and secondly, a sea being split in half. Well, that doesn't seem to happen in my life. Don't know if it does to you. So the stories that we read in the Bible can put an unrealistic pressure on us to experience God in these miraculous ways. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that God couldn't do that kind of thing. But I also feel that if God is this incredible God, then he can choose to meet us in the most simplest of places, the most simplest of manners, and frankly, in manners that wouldn't totally freak us out. I would be freaked out if I saw a sea split in half in front of me. I'm sure you would too. So maybe a starting point for us this morning is not to expect too much. You know, if you're trying to feel close to God, to experience what God is like, don't assume that it's going to be something magical, mystical, miraculous. You know, a number of months ago, I spoke here about the story of Elijah, who tried to kind of run away from a load of troubles in his life. And when he finally experienced God in that story, God appeared to him in the quietness and the stillness rather than in the great storms. So maybe for some of us, we need to stop looking for God to do something incredible for us to feel near to him and look out for him in the simpler and more usual rhythms of our daily lives. But sometimes we might be making it hard for us to experience God in our normal life because of the second idea, this principle of distancing. You know, for some of us, I think it's possible that we have, maybe unintentionally, distanced ourselves from God through choices that we have made, and therefore we can't feel him close to us, even if he really is. Let me give you an example. I'm sure that before you came out this morning, you noticed it was super cold outside, so you wrapped up. Maybe you bundled up, you put your hat on, your gloves on, your scarf on, maybe your fur-lined boots, your snood, your thickest winter coat. I know it's not the Arctic, but it was cold this morning. And then you head outside. Well, if you did that, you made it much harder to feel the cold, right? It still is cold. You've just wrapped yourself up against it. And I think this can be true when it comes to experiencing God. He is still there, but we've wrapped so much stuff around us that it's harder for us to feel it. Because we can be really quite skillful, really quite adept at making ourselves so busy or so surrounded by noise that it may not be possible for us to feel God's presence because he's being crowded out by everything else. We know what it's like. We've got jobs. We've got chores to do. We may have children to support, children to taxi around, children to entertain, children to do homework with, and loads of other things that we all will have in our lives. And frankly, God would do well to get a word in edgeways. So maybe we don't feel close to God all the time because we're not giving him enough attention. I don't think it's a coincidence that we often feel far away from God when we ignore him, live independently from him, or rush around expecting him to tag along with our plans and fit in with us when we've got 5 minutes. But don't let busyness be an excuse either. Don't let busyness be an excuse for not giving God the attention that we claim we want from him. Because even in our busyness, we can find time to fit in our favourite Netflix show or scroll around social media looking at inane rubbish for, let's be honest, hours on end, right? Maybe it's not actually that we're too busy, but we've just allowed life, or life has become so noisy that we can't hear God over everything else. Not long before we got in the car this morning to come to church, Emily, our 6-year-old daughter, said to me, "Daddy, what are you talking about this morning at church?" So I explained it to her a little bit to her, and I said, "I'm talking about those times when God doesn't feel near to us." So I was like, I'm going to test this one out then. Why do you reckon we don't always feel that God is near to us? And her response was basically this. She said, well, sometimes our friends can distract us because they may be being unkind to us or encouraging us to think about other things rather than God. Thought, I don't know how, but you're a wise child. Isn't that true for us as adults as well? That we can sometimes be distracted by things happening to us and maybe the social circles we choose to hang out in. I wonder what's causing the noise in your life. Is it overworking? Is it your friends pulling you away from God? Is it entertainment? Is it an addiction that you need help to shake off, like Becky spoke about a couple of weeks ago? And if that is you, we would love to help you as a church to do so. Or is it, and forgive me for being super churchy here for a minute, is it sinful behavior that essentially means you've turned your back on God, even though you know full well he's there, but you're choosing to look that way rather than at him, and your sinful behavior is meaning you're going further and further away? So you're just choosing not to experience God right there. You know, the weird thing for me is that one of the times I felt furthest away from God in my faith journey was when I was working here for our church. I think you can file that under irony. You know, the noise had become so loud in my own head, a story I've kind of told before, and the busyness of trying to work for a church and do everything else meant that I was neglecting to spend time alone with the God who I was encouraging everyone else to spend time with. File that one under hypocrisy. But that was my doing. And it seems so obvious when we say it like this, but maybe we just need to intentionally carve out time to be with God in order to feel close to him, rather than just fitting him in whenever we can. Obviously, I don't know what your diary is like, but I reckon you can dedicate some space to God if you really want to. Returning to the Psalms, we read the following in Psalm 46, where God speaks through the writer and says this. He says, "Be still and know that I am God." Maybe we need to find some time to focus our minds on God, and then we might just feel him closer to us. You know, many people in our church community here have been to places like Sizewell, or maybe kind of gone to various worship events like our Encounter evening last Sunday night. And so often people come back from those things feeling that their faith has been renewed and they feel God closer to them. Weird that. After some dedicated time focusing on God, it feels like God's presence is closer to you. I don't think that's a coincidence. And if you don't feel convinced yet that this is a good idea, please pay attention to this next statement. Jesus did it. Jesus did this. Jesus took himself away to experience closeness with God. And here at The Forge, we believe that Jesus is really worth finding out about and really worth following. So if he did it, maybe it's a good idea for us to do it too. And I find that genuinely incredible. This person, Jesus, who is God as well as human, still needed to find times of solitude to feel close to God. That probably opens up a load of questions as well, but I find that incredible. And maybe you're feeling a little bit more convinced by this now, but kind of want to know how. Well, I'll make 2 suggestions. I don't think they're the only suggestions, and I don't think they're particularly mind-blowing, but maybe that's the beauty of them. Here's suggestion number 1. Maybe suggestion number 1 is you start following through a plan on the Bible app. If you don't know what that is, go on your phone, go on the App Store and download the Bible. It's that simple. And I would suggest finding a plan. There's loads of kind of study guides on there, and commit to following a plan for a certain amount of time, and just see what happens. I came across this one just this week. It almost looks as if I was meant to look at it. And it's this idea called the unseen God, which is about trying to trust that God is with us even when we don't feel it. I think it kind of links nicely between what Mike said last week and what we're talking about today. So maybe that's one idea, or maybe just find some of our songs that we would sing in church. There's a link at the bottom of our Forge feed, and if you don't know what that is, come and ask our helpers at the Next Steps table afterwards, and we link our playlist through that. And maybe just commit to listening to one song a day, or maybe the same song over a certain number of days, and just see what that reveals to you about God. And I can't promise that you'll suddenly feel super close to God, but I do believe that it might be these small, achievable changes that helps us to feel closer step by step by step. So we can over-sensationalize what it's like to experience God, and we can distance ourselves from experiencing God. But maybe there's a different way of looking at this, and this is this notion of misfocusing. And this is the notion that maybe we're focusing too much on our feelings and not enough on our faith. You know, just because God feels distant doesn't mean God is absent. Just because you don't feel that God is there, it doesn't mean he's not there. Don't believe everything you feel, because feelings aren't facts. You know, like not feeling the cold, it doesn't mean it isn't cold. It just doesn't feel like it. And if you're new to church, or maybe it's just been a while since you felt close to God, I reckon that if you were to ask most card-carrying Christians in here, or any other church community for that matter, about feeling close to God, I reckon nearly everybody will say they feel closer to God at some times than they do at others. But it's just a feeling. God has always been there. You know, the truth is, I feel closer to my wife at some times than I do at other times, but it doesn't mean we're any less married at some times rather than others. I usually feel closer to her after we've done something fun together, been to one of our favorite places, talked through some stuff on a long car journey, or navigated some of life's difficulties together. And it's not that much different in my relationship with God. I might feel closer to him when I've been intentional about doing something with God, maybe through worship. You know, maybe Ben has chosen the songs I like that week. Maybe when we've been especially focused spiritually, or gone through a struggle where we've locked arms together and navigated one of life's difficulties. But just because I feel close to God in that particular moment, it doesn't mean that I am. It's still just a feeling. And as the song goes, it's more than a feeling. Some of you were a little bit worried I was about to sing then. You know, for some of us, we need to forget our feelings and fire up our faith. Forget the feeling that God isn't there and fire up our faith that tells us, yes, he is. Yes, he is there, even if we don't feel like it. We need to fire up the faith that David had when he wrote these words in what we call Psalm 139. He says, I can never escape from your spirit. I can never escape from your presence. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to heaven, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me, and your strength will support me. That sounds like a great comfort. That sounds like a great place to be in. To know that there is nowhere that we can go to get away from God's presence, that he will never leave us or forsake us. The fact that we can live in his presence can make every moment of life meaningful. In our magic moments to our moodiness, in our days and in our distresses, in our weaknesses and in our normal weeks. We might not always feel like it, but we can have faith that it's true. So maybe we need to redirect our focus from our feelings that can lie to us, to our faith that is steadfast and true. And it's hard to do that. You know, at the minute, I'm going through some cognitive behavioral therapy that I need because of the way my feelings can cause me all kinds of distress for various reasons. And part of that process is me trying to learn that my feelings I have aren't necessarily facts. And it's hard. And it takes a heck of a lot of practice. And I think it's going to take a lot longer than I want it to. But I know it's going to be worth it. And it's going to take a lot of practice to have the faith that God is always with you, even when you don't feel like it. And it might take a lot longer than you want, but it'll be worth it. It'll be worth it to know that God is always with you. And I think we start with looking for him. Rather than expect us to suddenly reveal himself, let's look for him with a faith that tells you he is already there. We need to keep God on our mind. Have you ever noticed that if you're about to buy a new car, you see that car everywhere? It's because you got that car on your mind. Maybe if you've got God on your mind, you'll start to see God everywhere. You'll start to see him in the people that you meet, in the advice of a friend, in the giggle or the cries of your children, in his comforting calm in that meeting that you're dreading. You know, maybe we don't always feel close to God because we focus too much on our feelings and forget to fire up our faith. And maybe if we fire up our faith, we'll be able to say with confidence, just like David did, I know the Lord is always with me, even when I don't feel it. I will not be shaken, for he is right beside me, even if my feelings are trying to lie to me and tell me otherwise. No wonder my heart is glad and I rejoice. Let me pray for us, church. Father, I thank you that we can know it's true that you are always right beside us, even when we don't feel it. I thank you for those times where we have felt you right beside us, when we really, really need it. But I pray that we'll know that you are there, even in the normality, the mundanity of life as well. And I pray that we commit to searching for you. I pray that we commit to doing what we can do so that our feelings are overridden by our faith. So that our faith is so fired up that they can look at our feelings dead in the eye and say, that's not true. So whatever it is we need to do to feel closer to you, may we commit to doing so. And may we have our supporters alongside us to help us to do that. So that we can know you are always with us and that we will not be shaken, for you are right beside us. And that our hearts will be glad and that we will rejoice. Amen.
Shall we stand as we sing together?